You want me to go ahead and you want me to go ahead and start then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Travis Wilson. I am the research specialist with the Wren's Weed Science Lab. Um, my role with the lab is I run all of the experimental trials that we're running primarily for herbicides, looking at different rates, effectiveness on different species, and then just gathering that information and data and bringing it back to the public and land managers like yourself to hopefully gather your information to have the best available options.
Cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and click through here really quick, give you the backwards slides all the way to my intro slide, which is to say, this is me in reverse. My name is Matt Wallerath. I'm an outreach specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison academic staff, working with UW Extensions. And this will be my section of the presentation as we go along. So look forward to a bunch of information about applied techniques, kind of ways to do different land management options. And then I'll kick in for some reporting and mapping of invasive species. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And like Bill said, so put questions in chat and we'll answer them at the end. And then might have time for some Q&A live as well. With that, I'll turn it back over to Travis for his PowerPoint. Do you want to do it?
I think you're up. I think.
Oh, okay. Yes, I am. Thank you. So here's me doing my my part of the lab. So we have three different parts, and we do work with pastures and alfalfa, and then also kind of this bleeding into the natural areas of Wisconsin. So lab does a lot, and Travis and I represent the academic staff component, kind of the backbone with Dr. Wren's. So he's doing a lot of the trials as a research specialist, and I do a lot of the outreach as the outreach specialist. And we overlap a fair amount, but we both have our jobs as lab managers. My particular job is as follows with the Wisconsin First Detector Network. So I'll let you read that to yourself. We're now using the words community science versus citizen science, because if I go to Portugal and do science, it's community science, and the same for Portuguese man, woman, they, whatever comes here. It's community science. I'm a scientist, but it's not. I'm not a citizen of Portugal. So that's our new distinction here in these days. And we have a pretty good impact. This is a couple years ago, working on our numbers from last year now, as far as what we get done around the state. And we do help to lead a variety of projects around the nation, as well as policy and regional stuff. This is me, a various job experience. So what I'm going to get into here in a minute too is just looking at, when we talk about invasive species and then we're talking about forestry, what do we mean in particular? And so we have you know, this definition here, which is a very dry statuette kind of thing, but it does give us actual Wisconsin perspective for when we use the word invasive species. And I want to be specific about using that word versus aggressive natives or other sort of you know, invaders or exotic species, because when we say invasive species in Wisconsin, we have this thing called NR40, and it's across all different types of plants and animals, and even like the white nose bat fungus thing. You'll notice there's like the feral swine up here that's not even in the state, and carp and jumping worms, and also plants and bugs, insects of all types. So when I say this, it's important that we know what we're talking about, because people will tell you in their forestry projects that they have like creeping aspen or juniper and things. And those are, you know, they're aggressive natives, but they're not invasive species. So that's kind of what I'm trying to tease apart right now. So we have this rule here in the state when it comes to owning stuff, buying stuff, selling stuff, and growing it, and just how kind of it occupies land, called NR40, like I said. And it covers valuable organisms. So, you know, if you have dead wicker baskets made of an invasive tree, that's actually fine as long as it can't make new trees. So, you know, it's trying to be reasonable, but we do have particular classifications for things that are important. And this, you know, as far as even your edges of your forest and whatnot, you think of, well, parsnip, I'll get off that slide, but like, you know, causes nasty burns. And so things that are either harmful to human health or the environmental health or to the economy are all considered invasive species. So, but they have to be on that list for me to call them that. And invasive species comes here from this book, John Curtis. So from the turn of when the first kind of plows came in and the settlers came in, they had plots of every single corner of those big squares, and they would record the native plants at the time. So that's kind of our edge there. And then we also have biologists that do assessments every year. And there's a new update coming to this law probably in 2025, 2026. So there'll actually be a new round of these rules and regulations that will affect trees. They'll add some things up and down. So keep your eyes open for that, but that's still pretty far out. In Wisconsin, just getting through our deep dive of what we mean by this, the prohibited there for P means that you cannot even possess this in the state of Wisconsin. And this is like kudzu, so things that are really, really nasty. And then things that are restricted are more like our garlic mustard, which we would wish we could ban from our forest, but it's not really like actually possible. So I think a lot of we're talking about kind of planning and woody stuff, but I want you to think about these categories as important for when you're doing your planning for what you want to do. If you have prohibited species, things that are really bad, we've never seen before in small populations, then consider grants and outside help. If you have these regular kind of forestry issues like everyone does, like buckthorn and honeysuckle, you kind of have to figure out how to get volunteers and do your stuff and be smart about it too. So these restrictions do make a big difference for how the state treats these things, and also kind of it's our first detection kind of prioritization process for what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, this is what we're looking at, which is if you can stop that first hunk of Phragmites from coming down the road to your edge of your forest or whatever, and you can just clean your tools, you can do a lot of good work. So I think at this point we're gonna go. I think we're gonna do the end maps at the end here. So I'm gonna turn this back over to Travis here, and we can talk more about all this later.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you, man.
Yep.
Oh, one sec. So again, thank you, Matt, for kind of going over a little bit of stuff what Mark had talked about on Tuesday, and then kind of really hitting home on invasives and what exactly is an invasive, so people can tell the difference there. Now we're going to kind of get into what management options landowners and managers have for these invasive, primarily shrubs in the wintertime is kind of what we're going to be focusing on. And on this slide, you can see the main management options. We have manual removal, so digging, hand sawing, forestry mowing, things like a fecon or a big brush mower. Herbicide use, there's a few different options that you can use for that. We have fire options as well. And then also biological control, which is kind of getting some more steam with goats being kind of a public interest with people wanting to use that. So for manual removal, what you'll have to do is you'll need to dig enough of the root crown, as much of the root crown as you can for most species, with the exception being, I believe, most, if not all, conifer species. An example would be red cedar. So what you would have to do with those is you would need to cut them as lower than the lowest branch as you can. And if you're able to do that, they usually don't survive. And it's actually a lot easier to kind of manage for those. This method is less detrimental to invasive species, less invasive to natives. You might have some ground disturbance, but you're not putting herbicides, you're not mowing a bunch of things. So you're kind of selecting just those invasives and those target species that you want to get. It is very labor intensive, as I'm sure some people here have had to experience, going out and using a shovel to dig up a multiflora rose or a buckthorn or even honeysuckle. Ropes start to be involved and you really have to work at it sometimes. And so there are some tools designed for this. As you can see in this picture, this is called a weed wrench. And it works pretty well for a lot of things, but again, it's just the labor intensive aspect to it. And so you end up using a lot of time devoted to getting these out. And so some people like to use this instead of herbicide, you don't put herbicide on your ground, so you're saving species in that sense. But it is kind of the lower of the options for this list. So
There's thresholds
next,
there too. I'm just going to mention quickly, if you go back a sec, which is to
yep.
say some things are really easy to pull out of the ground, depending on your soil type and upon how young they are. But once they get to a certain size, it becomes very, very much more difficult. So you have to kind of go and do your planning beforehand as far as, different techniques, different times. Because sometimes if it's soft and they're young, it's easy to pull stuff out. And if they're old and it's rocky, it's not. And it's site dependent too.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's a good example. Another one, which I wish I had the picture for, is say mulberry or box elder. A lot of people will end up just cutting the above ground growth and just keep cutting it every single year. And then when they decide to finally get rid of that thing because it keeps growing, they try to get the root out, and it's the root of a 5-10-year-old tree, even though the above ground mass is only a foot tall, the root mass underground is way more than most people would be able to handle at that point. So there's some things that are definitely easier than others in this option. The next one is forestry mowing. The nice thing about this, well, I'll go into it a little bit. So forestry mower, you can kind of see from the picture, that's what would be called a fecon mower. And this mulches woody debris. It kind of, I think they're rated up to like maybe 6 inches. I think depending on user, they might be willing to go a little bit higher. The only thing with forestry mowing is you would either have to purchase a mower yourself or have to hire out a contractor or somebody that has one. And unfortunately with this, it can have high cost to using this for contracts and stuff like that. It also produces a lot of potential for follow-up management if it's the only thing that's used. If you're just going out and mowing a lot of these things, kind of like the example with the multiflora, or not multiflora, but the mulberry. If you're just mowing these things above ground and letting them regrow the next year, you're going to have to follow up and either mow them again or use a different management practice to get rid of those things. The last point with this one is it does cause a high level of disturbance. You're going in and you're mulching. Usually it's about the entire understory is what gets cut. And so you're getting rid of all of those small trees, those shrubs, and you're opening up a lot of ground exposure. And while that might be good for native species and getting the desirables, it also opens up for advantageous invasives or some things that you might not want there. And so you have to be mindful of that if you decide to use this. Another thing is that it does leave that mulch and that woody material on the ground. And so if you have a lot of stuff that's being cut, you could have a very dense layer that almost forms a matting or mulching out there. And so you can have species not be able to grow through that wood layer. And so you would probably want to either remove that or try to do something to help with that. Next is going to be our herbicide option. This is, in my opinion, probably the most effective of all of the options that we have here when it comes to controlling things. You get a lot of high effectiveness with for a lot of species, depending on what you're going for and which herbicide you use. There's a lot of different application types, techniques for a lot of different situations. A lot of people have one issue that somebody else might not have, and so you wouldn't want to use the same approach maybe that they would. And so it's kind of using your own scenario and finding the right herbicide or application technique. And we'll go through that here in a second. When it comes to herbicides, it's highly recommended that everybody takes the pesticide applicator training. It not only gets you educated on how to use, but the safety requirements and precautions and everything that comes to using herbicides and understanding the limitations with them, and the correct and safe approach to applying those on the landscape.
Note on that too, that you can, on your own property, you have some rights to do herbicide treatment, but especially be careful if you're next to a river or wetland areas. as you actually have to have further training and permits to do this kind of stuff too. So I know forestry, we think about the big trees and the pines, but they often have a river right next to them. So if your feet would be wet in socks, you have to get a permit as well.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. And so the last thing with herbicides is you may have some unwanted impacts that happen with these herbicides. They are used to kill plants is the main use of them. And so you might have some impacts to desirable species. One example is oaks. There's quite a few herbicides out there that can be harmful to oak species. And so knowing those that information and knowing that maybe you need to be outside of your oak drip zone or certain information like that would be helpful for your situation. The last thing would be that you can actually get what's would be called a ring of death around a shrub that you have sprayed. And this will form a ring around the original shrub spot, whether it's the stump that's left or the standing shrub, and you'll have an area where you won't have anything grow for maybe a couple of years. It could be maybe a little longer. And that's because that herbicide is still in that soil and not allowing for new plants to come in and germinate and grow and establish there. And so there's some herbicides that have higher impacts of this, and those may need to be used in more extreme situations for people or with different situations. So now we'll go through each of the different herbicide application options that we have. The first one is going to be the cut surface application. And with this one, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using brush cutter, chainsaw, handsaw, if you'd rather use that. And you're going to be removing as much of the above ground material as you can, trying to cut it level, the stump level, as close to the ground, and then using your herbicide mix of whatever you're using, you will spray on the live tissue of the plant, which is another word is the cambium layer, and that's all you need to spray. On bigger stumps, like in this picture, you can see there's kind of a tinted color on this outer edge, and so on bigger stumps, all you really need to do is spray this little thin line and make sure herbicide contacts that. But on the smaller ones, it's not worth going through the effort. You might as well just cover the whole thing. So it's recommended to apply this herbicide as soon as it's cut. That helps with greater effectiveness, also making sure that things are sprayed after they're cut so we don't have to do follow-up. But preferably within an hour of cutting, just so you can make sure you get the full effectiveness of it.
Even as soon as possible within like 5 minutes is ideal because you're losing active camp. That basically the plant is dying. So as soon as you can have it basically move the herbicide, the better. So that I think hour is like the maximum, but you can do as soon as possible. It really does make a difference.
And I guess that one thing I did need to mention with these herbicide applications, since we're going to be working in winter and we're not going to have active plant growth, we're going to be mixing with bark oil, or some people use diesel as an option as well. And we use this to help the herbicide be relocated into the plant and driven down and taken in by the plant. If you just use water in the wintertime, it won't sit long enough for the plant to be able to bring it in and actually utilize that herbicide. So we're mixing with bark oil. In this picture, it's bark oil blue. You can kind of see from the blue tint, most of them have a color tinting or a dye to help indicate things that have already been sprayed, so you don't have resprays and stuff like that.
For that reason, too, I think it's important to mention, people always ask, when can you do this? Or when can't you? Really, a better question is, when can't you do this? And I would say that for that reason, if the plant is pushing stuff up from its roots, like in the spring, that's when you have, it's harder to get into that system. So, but Travis, when do you think is the best time to do it? Or when would you not do cut surface application?
I would say early spring. I see a lot of sap flow, so that might not be the best time. I've done stuff in the fall time though, so I maybe early spring to middle summer. Because at that point you get into foliar options, and there might be better options for that.
I like fall and winter when they're pulling energy in, and winter with the bark oil I think is good too. So okay, thank you.
Yep. And so going back, this application method works better for things that would be 2-3 inches in diameter and above. When you start cutting smaller things, you have the potential to maybe lose those stumps, and then having resprouting, or just having too many to have to worry about with that technique. So it might be better to use something else. You want to avoid spraying in the winter when there's high amounts of snow present or it's actively snowing. What you can have happen is the herbicide will hold and collect in the snow, and then it will relocate into the soil once that snow melts. And so you can have the herbicide transferring to an area that you don't want. And then not only are you maybe not having full effectiveness with that herbicide on the targeted species, but you're having negative impact somewhere else. And so you want to limit that option as well. And the last thing is, this may be for herbicide options, maybe a little more labor intensive, but that also depends on what your end goal is. If you need to clear debris and remove it, then it's going to be a little more labor intensive. But if all you're doing is a timber stand improvement, and you're just going through and cutting a few trees and letting them lay, then this could be a very viable option for somebody to get a fair amount of land done in a small amount of time. So the next one is going to be our basil bark application. And so in this application, what we're doing is we're not removing the shrub. We're actually going to be spraying the outside of the lower part towards the base of the stem. And what you want to do is, you could use a backpack sprayer and spray the bottom. I've used hand sprayers for this. It's kind of an ease and comfort thing for whatever is best for your situation. And you want to apply a continuous ring around the entire stem. And you would ideally have it 6 inches up the stem, going up the stem. And if you start getting larger diameter shrubs, you'd probably want to go maybe 1 inch or 2 for every inch bigger than say, I wouldn't do this for probably anything over 3 inches. You sure can. But at that point, you're probably better off doing a cut surface application. And so you can use this option for larger things. You just may start running into wasting herbicide on larger species that could maybe have been cut and used or something like that. This works really well for large areas, especially if you have, say, pencil or finger thin shrubs. If you have a bunch of buckthorn that you're trying to get rid of in your woods, this is a very good, and it's all 1 inch, maybe 2. This is a good option to be able to go through and spray the base of those and have good effective control for that.
For resprouts too, because that
Yes.
exact area is for if you've already done mowing and have come back through. And you want to be quick on that too. So it's like playing a quick little, like just walk around and spray and kind of walk around the tree quickly, right? For me, it took a while to understand how this worked. But yeah, it's very quick and just sort of blasting just the bottom bit.
And a lot of times what you're doing is you'll spray kind of the top section of the ring, and a lot of times you'll see that herbicide drop down. And so you can kind of watch, and as long as you get the outside coated, you don't need to drown it, you don't need it fully running down. You just want to see that the bark looks wet at that point, and you'll know that the oil is holding that herbicide there, and it'll get drawn through and hopefully driven down into the roots. And so for our last option for wintertime herbicide application is what's called hack and squirt or stem injection. Another style, but it's a little more tedious, would be girdling is kind of another option. But with this, what we're doing is we're using an axe, and we're just making 45-degree cuts into your shrub, making sure to get through that live edge, that cambium layer, and inserting anywhere from a half mil, maybe 1 to 2 milliliters of pure concentrated herbicide into that cut. And that'll be drawn into the plant. And we've seen very good effectiveness on especially buckthorn, large buckthorn with this. And so this was one in the years that I worked with the DNR that I girdled so many trees and so many things that if I would have been able to walk around with an axe and some herbicide, it would have made my life a lot easier. And I feel like we maybe could have gotten maybe a lot more done. And so with this is ideal for things maybe 3 inches or greater. You don't really want to do smaller. You got a sharp axe, you'll blow right through it. But you want to have, it's about 1 axe hit for every 3 inches. And then for every 2 to 3 inches larger on the diameter, you'll make another hit. And what you want to do is you want to keep it, all of those marks as at the same level on the tree as you can, kind of going around the stem as it gets as the diameter gets larger. And this is, like I said, this is a low labor option. Your heaviest thing is probably going to be your axe, and it can be potentially low cost as well because you don't have to use machinery or time spent removing materials. If you're able to leave things standing and dead, this could be a very, very viable option for some people.
There's also a max rate I want to talk about quickly.
Sure.
So people are wondering about as far as how things work between dabbing stuff or hack and squirt or foliar. Can you mention how there's like a limit per label you have to kind of think about for how it's going to be effective? So you don't want to go over that, but there's also like these limits for how much you can put on the ground at a time.
You're talking about like the amount on per acreage, like
Yes.
the rate that's allowed. Yeah. So in each one, so that's going to be up to the applier to make sure that they understand the herbicide that they're using, and what those rates are, because each herbicides are going to be different depending on one or the other, and those rates of allowable amounts are going to change as well. And so all of them should have on their data label those rates that are allowable. And that'll also change depending on the environment you're in. And so a lot of times you might be able to go a little heavier in agricultural settings as opposed to a natural area or something like that. You might have more impacts in the natural area that you're not allowed to use a higher rate. And so I would just make sure to check that label and know what that rate is and know how much you think you'll need to use. And in my line of work, have I rarely come close to putting so much down that we've gotten close to that rate. But it is possible. And so, yeah, I would say that it kind of falls to the person who's applying at that point to make sure and be conscious of that. Is that hopefully that answers the question, Matt?
For sure. Thanks.
Yep. And so the next, that's kind of what we have for herbicide application. When it comes to recommendations, I'm sure there's lots of questions that people have for all these different things they have. And I wish I knew the best options for everything off the top of my head, but unfortunately I don't. And so some options that we have through the lab for people if they need some information on a certain species. We've had these invasive plant management fact sheets put together. Matt has been working really, really hard on getting these updated and put back in. And so they're really well put together with a lot of our current information from what we've run, test-wise results, and what we're finding in the lab, as well as some secondary lab results that we've found from other universities, from stuff that they've found. So what this shows, this is actually the homepage to our Wren's Weed Science website. And what you do is you will click on the resources tab, and it brings down this drop down, and you want to hit the invasive plant management fact sheets. And after hitting that, it'll take you to this page, which lists all of the current invasive species that we have fact sheets for. And you can see the arrow shows this blue highlighted link, and you can click on that link, and what it will do will send you to a fact sheet for that particular species. And what it gives you is a lot of the management options and techniques, but it also gives you herbicide recommendations for those particular species. And it will give you this on the screen. It shows a cut stump application recommendation. I believe this is for honeysuckle. And so what you can see is it gives you kind of a little bit of information on how to apply the cut stump technique. And then this is just one example showing triclopyr with the common name being Garlon 4. And it gives you an effectiveness for the in-season application and then a season after the treatment, and what we're seeing with results for that specific herbicide. We give a rate that shows what we would recommend for this species of this herbicide, a timing, and then some other remarks with it as well. And this will depend on each species for what works best, what works maybe not as effective. Honeysuckle is a tough one that I know a lot of people have a lot of issues with actually getting control on. And so something that might work really well for buckthorn, I know a 20% solution of Garlon would work really well for buckthorn, but you're definitely not going to have the same control when it comes to milestone, when it comes to honeysuckle. And so there might be maybe a better option herbicide wise or something like that. And so if you have any questions or need any recommendations, this would be a good area to look right away, but also we're open, the lab is open for questions and trying to get as much information to land managers as we can based on what we're finding in the lab and updates with especially herbicide use and things like that. A lot of what we're looking at now is trying to find those lower ranges of these herbicides. We're trying to see just what that threshold is for effectiveness at that lower rate, so we can maybe start cutting back on some of these herbicide rates and stuff that we're putting down and save money, potentially some other species and some environmental factors as well. So yep, I forgot about these being in here. So those are just a few more
Right.
there. What's that?
Yeah, happens. Here we go. Fire.
So our next option is going to be fire options. And the two options for this are drastically different from each other. But what I would say is both of them may offer effective in-season control of plant growth. And they may even kill some more sensitive species like buckthorn, can have some susceptibility to fire, and you can have some top killing on some of those. And so that might work. With a lot of the fire stuff, you have high potential for follow-up. And so you'd have to go back. It's best to couple it with a different management technique and use it with something else to really maximize those benefits. You may need some extra resources that aren't easily available for most people. Even the backpack propane torch might not be a viable option for some people to be able to use something like that, or it might not resourceful. It might not be money-wise a good option. Prescribed burning is going to be a whole nother gambit with getting people organized and getting a game plan figured out and having the knowledge of how to actually successfully and safely implement a prescribed burn. And so it might not be a viable option for a lot of people, but there are resources to maybe have it be an option as well. And again, both of these options will work best when they're used with some other management technique as well. And so the first one is going to be the propane torch. And a lot of times what this is you can kind of see from the picture, the end where the flame's coming out is the torch part. And that is feeding into a hose that connects to a propane tank that is usually with backpack straps. And so you usually carry it around on your back and you walk around with a trigger that will burn whatever you're looking for. And so this technique, you need to kind of use the same idea as the cut surface, where you need to cut the above ground growth and leave a stump. And then what you're doing is you're using that propane torch to burn that stump. And what you want to do is you want to burn it until it's a bright cherry red color. And then that way, when it's glowing, you want it to be glowing red. And that's when you know that you've burned it sufficiently enough that it will hopefully kill it. This is a non-chemical option for people who are maybe looking for that. And so it could be viable for those who are not wanting to use chemical herbicides and stuff on their land. For our lab, excuse me, and for what we've been able to do with this application, we haven't seen the best overall control results. And we've seen reports out east where they have a lot better control with this technique. And I don't know if it's maybe something that we as a lab we're not doing something correctly that's not getting a better effectiveness. I'm just not sure on that, but this is an option for people. The other thing is the potential for fire hazard. I mean, you're putting fire to the ground. And so it's understanding this is going to be wintertime. So the likelihood of probably causing an escape fire or a wildfire is fairly low. But you have the potential and you're carrying around propane on your back. So just be mindful of all that.
You're starting those fire pits anyways, though, in the winter. So yeah, it depends on the species a lot for this. And it does work for garlic mustard in some forms as well. So
okay.
Not a bad idea to have.
Yep. So the next one is going to be prescribed fire. This is one that's starting to gain even more and more traction as people are starting to implement more burns on their land, coming to see maybe the benefits that are associated with them. And prescribed fire can be a very effective management method. It's a great way to manage for large areas. I've been on burns that were a few thousand acres. So, I mean, to be able to say that has been managed for that year based on that burn is huge, and it opens up a lot more work availability in other places for people that you might be able to better use that time somewhere else. When it comes to prescribed burning, you should have proper training if you're going to be burning, or have qualified individuals conducting the burns in those areas. There's a lot of dangers. There's a lot of little things with burning that it helps to have experience and know what you're doing. It's not just going out and putting a flame to the ground and having it do what you want. There's manipulation involved. There's understanding how the fire's reacting to your fuel load or the environmental factors. And so there can be a lot that kind of goes into it, and there's lots of training that people take to learn all this stuff. So it's a good tool, but it should be used with great caution for people who maybe are new to using this kind of technique. And then another one is, as well as fire works, it's not the ultimate end all perfect option. You do still need to go through and do some follow-up. And so you can kind of see in these pictures on the left is kind of the start of a fire where it had been laid with that drip torch at the bottom, and it will hopefully carry through that leaf litter and continue to burn through the understory, and hopefully get rid of the desirable shrubs that are coming through, maybe open up some more pockets for oak regeneration. and hopefully help bring in more native undergrowth forb species and stuff like that. And so the picture on the right shows a successful savanna burn, and you can kind of see just how much black is on the ground, and that's how you know that there was good fuel load going through there. And so one other limiting factor with prescribed fires for some people is you just might not have the fuel option to be able to carry a fire. And so you might have to work and use a different management technique. If you have a wall of honeysuckle, you're probably going to have a hard time getting fire to carry through that. And so what you would have to do is probably remove that honeysuckle first and allow for a better fuel option to be present in order to allow that fire to be carried through.
If you want someone to come out and help you with fire, you have to apply now. It's like going to the surgeon. They're backlogged, and it's sad to say, if you have the wherewithal to do this as a business, please do, because I know people that want this treatment, and there's just not that many burn days because it's so complicated. So plan now, ask now, call now.
That's a good point, Matt. I know there's a lot of co-op firefighters that they kind of do this for private landowners. They're pretty limited on only weekend work, and so there's really not a whole lot of option there. And like Matt said, there's only select limited amount of days in the year to be able to actually have your prescription met to be able to put fire on the ground. And so it's better to have maybe another option that you're using with this to also be able to just get some management if you have a year where you're not able to get your fire implemented. So, yeah. And then the last one that I have is the biological control. And so the only one that I know of really so far is using goats in these settings. And from what we've experienced here at the lab, I would say there's been some promise with invasive control, but it would definitely need either a secondary option or the ability to have that herd do follow up for a number of years to keep going in and really keep driving those invasives back. The issue with this is that you have potential high costs involved with that. A lot of times, most people don't have their own herd, and so you have to contract that out, and that can be very expensive. Goats can range where we've done stuff where it's been $5 per day per head of goat. And when you have them for a month, that can really, really add up for sure. And the last thing is the husbandry aspect of goats. Unless you have a contract where you have the contractor who's supplying everything, which will probably drive up your cost, there's potential for you having to do fencing, watering, checkups on the herd, making sure if anything happens, you contact the contractor. If any escape, you have to figure out that situation. Predators, there's lots of things. So I don't think that this is not an option at all. I think it's potentially could be something, but there are some limitations with goats at this point right now. And so this was the last management option that I have. I just wanted to be able to show all of you that there's ample options and different ways that you can combat these invasives. Everybody has kind of one main goal, and that's ridding their land of these invasives. But that's kind of a lot of times where the similarities end. And so understanding your situation, your land, what your end goal is, what you want to accomplish, and take these techniques and figure out your game plan for what you think will be your best approach to help preserve, improve whatever you want to do with your land. So, and with that, I'll hand it over to Matt, who's going to go over kind of some ed mapping. And once you've gone out and found all these things, it'd be great if you could mark it for us so we could follow it and keep monitoring this stuff. So do you want me to put sharing, Matt, or do you want?
You know what? You can just drive it, and we'll just do that, and then I can maybe later on. So, yeah. So I'm going to do another part. What we're talking about here is integrated pest management. So we have all these different options that Travis has laid out, and they might fit well for your site, or they might not, but keeping them in rotation also, and kind of almost seeing as like fecon mowing, goats, and fire all have the same kind of options as far as how they present. A rough control, and you have to continue maintenance over time in order to continue that control. And we also want to be good stewards of our land and not go too far beyond the scope of what we've got going on. Actually, Travis, I'm going to take control of the screen just so I can see my stuff. There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so a big part of what we're doing is figuring out what we have for what's on the ground in the first place. So if you don't know what you have around you, or you can't ID or discover what's in your forest, then it becomes hard to make these plans and do these controls. So you have all these techniques in mind, and let's talk a bit about how we can do some scouting with some free online resources, and also consider a bit about reporting these things to a nationwide database so that we can make decisions on a landscape scale. So we're looking at this program today that I work with often called EDMAPS, and it is the Early Detection Distribution Mapping System. So it's online. Now people talk about apps, and the first thing that comes to mind is they say, well, what do you mean? Like iNaturalist, or like Seek, or I can do all these different ID things. We are working on that project right now, actually, with some of the ideas we've come up with. And we want to point out that these are good ways to see what you have on the ground in the first place. So, but we also recommend our trainings and our fact sheets and such. But no, it's not this kind of app that we mean. We want to actually be able to actively report some of these things. Now, actually, iNaturalist does this at the same time. But if you come across a plant in the wild and you say, wow, this looks very much like something, and I would like to ID it, you're going to have to do some work before you can do your database entry. We're talking about land management in general, and so we want to know what we have on the landscape. And a lot of you do, but also just want to share some tools as far as how we can learn about stuff and also report it effectively. By the way, this is an invading species coming from the east side of America, and it can be a problem for our orchards and our hardwoods. And so it happens to host the spotted lanternfly. And so going back to the beginning of the talk, Wisconsin Bird Detector Network, what we do is make an effort to do this early detection for things that have not yet been seen in the state. So no one has seen a full-grown lanternfly in Wisconsin, and if they do, we want to know about it. Okay, we'll call to action there. All right, we're gonna skip through this because this is what Travis just talked about. And so I'm going to emphasize here that as stewards of the land, we have to make sure that our first thing is that doing research, doing management, we have to do no harm first, and we have to make sure that we're not tracking around the very thing we're trying to prevent. So just a reminder to look around your vehicles and your clean your boots. It's actually it's a big deal for this kind of forestry stuff. You might want to write into your forestry contract something about cleaning your machines before you go to site to site, because this is one of the main ways that we see various species move around through seeds and through just rhizomes and whatnot. So take the time to do it. Know what you're working with. Know what your fill is. That's not weed on the right there, in which you can just have these little fragments that can cause huge problems down the road for your properties. Travis had mentioned earlier something about disturbance. And so talking about invasive species means we're talking about these plants that, in this case, that are very good at colonizing new disturbed ground, open, bare dirt. Things that are going to be the first to move in are these invasive shrubs. They have a lot of seeds out there. They're good at growing in low light conditions, or the open dirt. So, minimizing whatever you can in your disturbance of the soil and of the overall fabric of whatever, if it's roadsides, if it's forestry, whatever it is, prairies, make it as small, don't just go full full hog and just rip everything up, because the species we're talking about are the ones that will most easily use that new ground. So think about that too. Now we're talking about managing things, and we wanted to see when we can actually do that. And so to that extent, I'm going to show you a cool little tool here that it's called the invasive species calendar. And I'll show you where these are on the websites we have in a minute. But just to say, well, if I want to look for invasive species, when can I see it? And that's an important question, because if you go out there, we do want to say negative surveys as well. Maybe you can't find something, that's great. But if we're making work plans to go search for stuff or to do this control, in the first place, we want to know when's the easiest time to find these things. And so to that extent, this tool has a rating for both visibility on the bottom and then what stage of life it's in at the top. So you can actually make a work plan to go out and observe these things. If you want to get ahead of yourself, you can also look at where things have currently been distributed that we know of in the state. And this is our WISTIP viewer, which is going to be the Wisconsin Terrestrial Invasive Plant Presence Viewer. And it has records from both the database I'm going to mention, EdMaps, in a minute, and it has other smaller databases included from a couple other components over the life history of the project. So iNaturalist and things like that are making its way into EdMaps, get recorded here, and then sometimes individual scientists in their spreadsheets are also recorded here. It's a little more fleshed out than some other databases, but it's also kind of something that we make in our own homebrew here, and it's really a way to visualize stuff nicely over the process of our as we add records. So say you wanted to look at, for example, different types of species, you can collect that from Wisconsin on the left there for how they're regulated, or maybe you just cared about one particular species and you really wanted to see, just how the knotweeds over time were accumulating. So you can see that in the presence there as reports are collected, and then those dots will be put on the map for you. And so it's a great way to, like, if you have species of interest that maybe the calendar says, hey, I should look for these certain things, or I know of these from local land managers. Now I can select them and see if they've been reported near me and are therefore more likely to be on the ground in the first place. So that's all gonna be on their WIFTN website, Wisconsin First Detector Network. And you can click on the tools section, and that'll drop down a menu to let you do both that calendar and the WISTIP viewer. Okay, to finish up here quickly, how to use EdMaps. I really would love everyone to think about using this on your land and in natural areas as well. It's a really awesome tool. It's free. It's something that our lab uses all the time for data management and helps to verify across the state what's actually in Wisconsin. So you can make your own, make your account for yourself. I would recommend against sharing one account. There's times for it for municipalities, but better off doing it yourself so I can know who you are. You can use your work email or whatever, but you can go ahead and make it so that I can ask questions as needed, or anybody can for what you are showing. What's so neat about this, and there's a desktop and a mobile version as well, is that, and tablet too. I'm going to show you stuff from the website version on like Google Chrome. But you can click on something and you can pick your species, your time. And what's great about this is that you're actually drawing on the map where you know the infestation to be of a species. So that adds up the lat and long for you, and it actually does the area for you as well in acres or square feet, or you can select whatever it is. So that geolocation is really awesome for sharing across boundaries and saying to a landowner or to a natural area or whatever it is, hey, you have this on your site, or maybe for your own back 40. You can do an inventory this way. And then once it's completed, and then it'll be reviewed by actually our team here at Ren's Weed Lab Sciences, you then have an ID record in your dashboard of all the things you've reported. So you can then share that with neighbors or yourself or whatever it is over time to maybe the county to make something visible on the map with pictures and a geolocated like box for that kind of stuff. So really important. And then we get to see it um, as a state. It's actually a national program. Really, it's the whole all of North America at this point. So as we see threats accumulating, we can make better management decisions across different kind of boundaries. So there's two different mobile versions that we have right now too. So check it out. I'd say Maps is the best one to do. Just it's simple, and you're gonna have your stuff here that has both your ID images and information and the Maps, and then it has locations and then how to make a report. And you can even make negative reports if you have a negative survey. You didn't see what you thought you would, and you can make a list of species and upload that the same way you would a regular report. It's great to have that in your pocket and be able to do this on the fly, especially for prohibited species and things that you would hope not to see and are happy you didn't. With different kinds of that free form stuff. So we're almost done here. Make sure you upload your stuff. Work clean, go. Make sure you're arriving clean. Consider using these buckthorn blasters, which come from NASEMA for low impact herbicides. And I've got some links here for how to do that kind of stuff. And with that, we're actually close to 1. So we've got a quick read through of questions. But otherwise, I want to say thank you for having us. And this is being recorded, so please feel free to chime in later and give us a call, look us up, find the resources that you need to do this work yourself. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Matt and Travis. I got a couple of quick bark oil questions for you. First, where do you get it? And then what's the ratios like that you would mix with herbicides for the different applications, whether it's basil bark or cut stump?
You can get basil bark oil. I believe you can find it at some home improvement stores like Menards and stuff, but your best bet is maybe forestry suppliers or maybe like an herbicide wholesaler. I think Nutrient Ag might have options for like a close to Madison option. And when it comes to mixing, what you'll see when I had on the herbicide recommendation sheet slide that pulled up for the I don't know if you have that, Matt.
I do. Thank you.
Okay. So right where it says rate at 20% in oil, what that is of that mix, 20% is going to be the herbicide and 80% is going to be the oil. And so what you see for that percentage of the herbicide, that's going to be the percentage of the whole mix in oil. And so the rest is usually just going to be oil. Some might recommend some extra adjuvants, but most of the time, a lot of that's already in that bark oil. And so that helps with that. So that
They'll have guidelines on the label too. So like if you flip out the label on the bottle, they'll often have a type of species and a kind of a rate suggestion. So you might want to ask the person at the front desk, especially going to forestry supply, to decode that for you. But we also are public servants here, so you could email Travis and say, hey,
yep,
what do you recommend for this exact thing? So that's why we do these trials, is to minimize that for all the various components for reasons, recommending diesel or a little bit, like not really, but people use it. It's real.
It's
so
economical.
Don't be shy. Okay, other really quick questions that we had. So someone asked if there was an herbicide applicator process, and yeah, we have the pesticide applicator training process. So the link that was put in the chat would cover forestry in particular, and depends upon your need for what you're applying. The Ring of Death was mentioned, Travis. I don't know if you have questions as far as like just looking at herbicide. I'm trying to minimize, and that's I think why basil bark and cut stump are so good versus foliar. I do minimize as much as you can for processes like that. Yeah,
a lot of times what that I was kind of getting at towards more was the type of herbicide used.
Okay.
Where you're going to get maybe more, you're going to see higher effects, secondary effects from those herbicides than you would want. Arsenal's a good example where even when you minimally put that herbicide on that stump and you just barely let it run over the edge, you're still going to have bare areas around that shrub, like a foot or two at least outside of it, where you're not going to have anything growing for a little bit. And so it kind of depends on, and we look at that a little bit in our lab as well. We try to showcase what's having not just effectiveness, but also overall the best beneficial effectiveness. Because you can have effectiveness at control of something, but if you're also wiping out everything else in the process, is it really worth all that effort? I mean, it could be your only chance and option at this point. But yeah, I would try to, I guess, go more of a selective herbicide. So maybe something more like a triclopyr would be better to help maybe avoid some of those big death rings and things like that. So
In that picture you showed of forestry mowing, there was the device on the end of a skid steer, and I've seen people using walk behind brush hogs, brush mowers. Is that still considered forestry mowing? Is it just as effective as the other device that you showed a picture of? What's your thought of brush mowers like that?
I
What does
guess,
FECON stand for, by the way? I know FECON's like an acronym, right?
yeah, I don't remember what it is,
I don't even.
but yeah, it's like forestry.
Conservation.
Yeah,
I guess it's,
yeah.
anyways.
We have a DR mower that I think we absolutely probably could use as a brush mower in that sense. I don't think you would, when you look at like an individual plant, you're probably going to have the same effectiveness, whether it's chipped down with a Fecon or a brush mower. You're probably not going to get the same amount of area covered as you would with a Fecon, obviously, because you're gonna, even if it's power driven, you're gonna have to walk that mower everywhere. And it's going to be a lot of the same kind of follow-up where you're going to have resprouting coming back if you don't treat it with something right away. And so I would say it's pretty comparable, just on maybe a lower scaled end. So
And diameter is a big thing too. I mean, so
yes.
the DR is just going to have a lower upper range. So,
Yeah.
the Fecon can cruise like for speed for sure. And then some things you just, you can't get through it unless you have the right kind of tool. Though those DRs can actually be better for edges and to some extent, like grasses and things. Like there's things that, those Fecons are made for forestry. So the DR has a place, but it's not quite the same. Just
That's not,
force of nature,
yeah, that's not to say that if somebody has that tool, and they would maybe want to try and use that, if that's your option and what you want to use, you can certainly use it. If you're just trying to open up some area and cut some stuff back, some brush back for that growing season, then yeah, you can go out and use that brush mower. It might be a lot of work, but sometimes that's just what it is in this field. So
You can use other techniques too. So if you have something that's over diameter, then get out your chainsaw, get out your hack and scraper.
Yeah, and that's a good point. None of these, we've kind of touched on it. None of these treatments needs to be by themselves. You can couple, you could do 2, 3, 4, you could try all of these on your land if you think that would be the best approach for you. And so it's kind of using all of these tools and figuring out what the best for whatever you have of amongst these, what do you think would be the best and most efficient cost, control wise, and use that. So
I'll mention we do have a program in Wisconsin with cooperative invasive species management areas, which are professionals and volunteers that might have the technique for your exact region. So we do our science widely spread and try to make it as variable as possible, but sometimes that backyard knowledge from someone that's been doing it for years, so ask around, find those clubs, find those forestry groups, and ask that question, because we have our opinions and they're well driven, and sometimes local knowledge. Wisconsin can be so variable for how stuff grows and how the soil treats things, and what technique would work somewhere that wouldn't work. North or south in Wisconsin can be kind of huge. So, poke those people. And if you need contacts, if you're driven to do that, we do have, that's part of what we do here as well, is make those connections.
And
So
I'll
we're
include, oh, go
we're
ahead.
well over. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Will.
I was going to say, I'll include connections to you, got your website information, and people can get a hold of you if they have specific questions. And we covered a lot in the chat too. I'm glad there's some good questions there as well. Thanks, guys, for your time. And
No problem.
and
Our pleasure.
everybody have a good day. Thanks for
Thanks.
participating.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks, Bill.